Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Seth, one of the co-hosts of Engaged Podcast, to bring you today another great episode of Engaged Podcast. But before I can get into that, I have to tell you first about my world-famous announcements. If you are new to the podcast and this is your first time listening, I just want to say welcome. We love hearing from our new audience members. We love connecting with you. We love hearing from you. We love hearing your story and what you have to offer the world. If you have not done so yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you're hearing this podcast right now, or follow button, whatever your app calls it. That way, if you subscribe, every time we come out with a new episode of Engaged Podcast, you will be notified as soon as possible. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, go ahead and go over to our YouTube page. We're doing a lot of things over there. So we just got done doing the music reviews with the band U2. But when we did a bit of a kind of a special little thing where me and Pastor Anthony sat down and we watched a documentary between Bono, the lead singer for U2, and Eugene Peterson, who is not only a theologian, but also helped to translate one of the most modernized Bible translations called The Message. So if you're a fan of The Message Bible translation, Eugene Peterson's the one who did that. And he sits down with Bono and they talk about the book, The Psalms. Fantastic, tremendous. I cannot express how good it was. So it's a 3-part video. It's on our YouTube page. You can check it out. We're starting a new series, a new music review series here in the next couple of days, or it's already out depending on when you're listening to this, called For the Love of God, specifically about what's love got to do with it. So we're going to be looking at love songs and kind of examining the lyrics to find out if it fits in with 1 Corinthians 11, talking about what love is in a biblical sense. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. So with that being said, let's get into who our guest is today. Our guest today is a fantastic author. I can't stress that enough. I discovered him about almost 4 years ago with his book, Night Driving for the Soul. Completely took me by surprise. I was not expecting what that book had to offer. And then later, his book, Your God is Too Glorious. His name is Chad Bird. Chad Bird has an amazing story. He is a fantastic individual and just a great author and a great man of God. So you guys are in for a great episode today. We get a little bit technical with some theological terms. However, if that's something that interests you, you're in for a great episode. If not, we do talk about other things related to church, the Bible, worship, all kinds of different subjects that I think are extremely important for every Christian, especially if you are an elder or you're in leadership of a church. That you guys need to hear. So give it up for our friend, Chad Bird.
Pastor Anthony back at you with another Engaged podcast. We are hanging out at my house, so the background looks a little bit different. Hanging out with Seth. Seth, what's going on?
It's a great, wonderful day, beautiful day here in Western PA, and I'm really excited to have our guest on today.
Yes, Chad Bird. Now, Chad, Seth is familiar with you. I don't know you. I was poking around beforehand on your blog, and I actually shared something that you wrote about Pastoral Ministry. We can talk about that later, but why don't you do me and the audience a huge favor and share with us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with my family. I'm married to Stacy. We went to high school together, and then years later we reconnected, and so we've been married for the past 8 years. We have together 4 kids, 2 sons, 2 daughters. We also have three grandchildren. It's great to kind of almost start over when you have some grandchildren. So I have my family here. Very thankful for them. For work, I am what my employer calls a scholar in residence. So I worked for 1517 All our materials are at 1517.org. We're basically some people think of us as a theological think tank. Some people describe us as simply a Christian nonprofit. But our goal is to produce biblical and theological resources for the church. So at 1517.org, you can see it all. We've got, of course, the typical articles you'd expect from a website. But we also have a publishing house. So we put out a number of books every year. We have a free online academy called 1517 Academy, where people can sign up and take courses who want to dive a little deeper into apologetics or biblical studies or whatever it might be, history that interests them. We have, I don't know how many, 15, 20 podcasts. I host or co-host 3 of those, 40 minutes in the Old Testament, in which we work our way chapter by chapter through the Old Testament. We've been doing that for, oh my goodness, 5 years now.
And how do we
find pardon?
How do we find that? Like what you're explaining?
This is all you can. Well, the podcasts are available on any podcast app. But if you want the hub of all the resources, go to 1517.org. Yeah, everything is there. Also have a relatively new one that I co-host with a couple of friends. It's called A Field Guide to the Bible. That's designed for people who either want a refresher on kind of the big picture of the scriptures, or someone, and this is kind of the ideal audience we had in mind, somebody who knows nothing, and I mean nothing about the Bible. So, but they're interested in learning. So they could listen to this. We have the Old Testament done now. And in about 10 or 12 episodes, they're going to be walked through the entire history of the Old Testament. And then I've got one called Hidden Streams, which is a devotional podcast that's based on the Psalms. So anyway, I basically just am able to talk about Christ all the time in a number of different ways, whether my books or articles or podcasts or speaking engagements. I travel across the country speaking at congregations and conferences. So a lot of opportunities I have to take the message of Christ and to present it in all sorts of different media, as well as face-to-face.
So sitting here, it's impossible to ignore the multitude and plethora of textbooks behind you. So obviously you have some education in your background. Could you share a little bit about your education?
Yeah, so I have a couple master's degrees. I have a master's degree actually 2 master's degrees from Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was a professor there for about 5 years. I taught Hebrew as well as Old Testament. So that is my background. I deal some with the intertestamental literature, but my main focus has been on Hebrew as the biblical Hebrew, as well as some rabbinic Hebrew. And then I have also a master's degree from Hebrew Union College, which is it's a rabbinical seminary in Cincinnati. So they train rabbis in the Reformed Jewish tradition, but they also have a PhD program. So I was there for about 3 years working on my master's degree. So I was able to study with rabbinic scholars, and really fascinating world to kind of enter into the Jewish literature and to get a better, just a better feel for the way they interpret the scriptures, which has influenced a lot of the way that I engage in biblical interpretation as well.
I have some quick questions for you. So my professor at Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary, his full name is C.J. Williams. Have you ever ran across his path at all or know of that name?
I've seen his name. Yes.
He studied, I can't remember the name of the school, but he went to something almost exactly where he studied with the rabbis and doing all that stuff for his doctorate. And it was in Baltimore. I remember him referring. So are you familiar with what school that might be?
I wonder if it's Jewish Theological Seminary. I'm not for sure where they're located, but it could be in the conservative Judaism sector of that particular branch of Judaism. Yeah.
Okay. So the languages, what would you say to the person listening, whether they're a layman or even a pastor, that says, look, why waste my time studying Hebrew or Greek for that matter? You know, I have the Bible, I can read it and I can go preach, and you don't need to do all that other stuff. What would you say? Argue the reasons why that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'll start out with a phrase that one of my own rabbinic teachers used to like to use. He would say that reading the Bible in translation is like kissing your bride through the veil. You don't get skin to skin. There's a barrier that's between you and that which is really the I guess not the real thing, but the original. So anyone who has learned a foreign language, whether it's a modern language, Romance language like Spanish or French, or maybe they've learned German or whatever it might be, Latin in some cases, anyone who's taken the time to learn another language realizes right away that there are aspects of language A that you cannot fully bring into language B. So you can accurately translate something, but it's not the same as reading it in the original. There's nuances, there's connections between words, sometimes there's word plays or certain idiomatic phrases that can't be transferred in totality from one language to another. You know, if you open up, let me just give you an example. You open up an English dictionary and you look up almost any word, and there's not just one meaning to it. It might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 different meanings. What are all these meanings determined by? By context. It's by the particular context of the sentence or the phrase or even the paragraph that these are found in. So as someone who knows English, well, you're going to know just instinctively what particular meaning is going to fit this particular word in this context. Well, other languages are like that as well. But you can't take a Greek word or a Hebrew word and bring it fully into another language because it is somewhat connected to all these other meanings. So by reading the Bible in Greek or Hebrew, by reading it in the original, you're going to have just a more nuanced, a more fully developed understanding of exactly what is being communicated. And sometimes translations are just, I don't want to say they're wrong, but they're just inadequate. Let me give you an example. This is one of my favorite examples, and people will pick up on this right away. Psalm 23. Everybody, if they have a psalm memorized, they have Psalm 23 memorized, right? Usually in the King James. So if you get down to the end, what do we hear about goodness and mercy? Goodness and mercy do what? Follow us, right? Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. The Hebrew verb there is darash. Now, darash can be translated follow, but in my opinion, that's an extremely weak translation of this word because it's a very graphic, very active sort of word. So when you rod off someone, you chase them, you pursue them, you're hot on their heels. In fact, it's used in negative context to describe someone being chased down in a persecuting sort of way. So you're chasing when you're darashing. You're right on somebody's heels when you're darashing. You're not simply following them. So what do God's goodness and mercy do? They chase us. They pursue us. They're hot on our heels. Now, if you just read it in English, you don't know that. But if you're able to read this in the original languages, you're going to pick up on these particular, I would say, deeper, more fully engaged sorts of meanings for whatever the context might be. That's a long answer to a short question, but
that's excellent. I agree with that. In fact, through my schooling, my philosophy changed very quickly to, it was the whole, you embrace Christ, you love Jesus. Who am I to hold you back? Go grab a Bible, jump in the pulpit and preach. Mm-hmm. And I do not subscribe to that in any way, shape, or form. The pastor needs to be adequately equipped, like Paul tells Timothy. Do me a favor, because I love that kind of stuff. Share with everybody, because I think there's another big part of that too. The writers like Paul is Hebrew, and he has a Hebrew mind. Also, I think a huge part of this is connecting when you're reading his epistles that would have meant something right away, and everyone in the church would have gotten what he meant because the Hebrew mind that we miss today, or Jesus, teaching when he's saying a certain word, they know that this is a direct reference to, whatever in the Old Testament, whereas we miss that today. But for them, it didn't even need explained because everybody knew this was the reference. Is there something you can just give an example of in the New Testament that is a direct connection that maybe we would miss by not knowing the language?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one that comes immediately to mind is Romans, I believe it's 3:25. Paul is talking about how Christ is put forward as a hilasterion. That's the Greek word that's used there. And that's usually translated as something like propitiation or something like that. But here's what you have to keep in mind. So for Paul, yes, Paul was a Jew. He knew Hebrew. He probably knew Aramaic, but he also, of course, spoke and wrote in Greek. That was very common back then for Jews to be bilingual or even trilingual. I think probably most of the Jews in Judea, for instance, were they knew Hebrew, they knew Aramaic, they knew Greek. So why do I say that? Because one of the translations that was popular back then, like we have our popular translations today. So for the Jews who spoke Greek, they used what's called the Septuagint. Septuagint is basically the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, if a Greek-speaking Jew knows his Greek Bible, his Septuagint, he's going to realize that word that Paul uses in Romans 3, hilastebion, is a word that is used over and over and over to translate the Hebrew for what we usually call the mercy seat or the atonement cover in the temple. So, the gold plate on top of the Ark of the Covenant. So when Paul, writing to the Romans, says that Christ has been put forward publicly as our hilastebion, he's saying to them, Christ is our atonement cover. He is our mercy seat. And he's not hidden behind some curtain in the Holy of Holies. He's publicly displayed for all the world to see on this Roman cross that serves as basically the sacrifice, the place of atonement. And Christ then is our mercy seat. So that's just one example of how knowing where Paul's coming from, knowing the Greek language, and knowing how it's connected to the Old Testament, you have a much fuller understanding of exactly what's being communicated there. And I actually do this all the time. So every Monday I produce what I call a video called "Reading the Gospels Through Hebrew Eyes." So I'll take the gospel reading for the coming Sunday. If churches follow a lectionary, they're probably following a certain system of reading where they know what the gospel is going to be that coming Sunday. So I'll look at that, and then more or less what I do is I just take it apart, word by word, phrase by phrase, and theme by theme, and see how this is connected to the Old Testament. This particular week, I looked at when Christ walked on the water, walked in the Sea of Galilee. Now, if you're a Jew and you're hearing that story, your mind is going to go back to all these water episodes in the Old Testament, whether it's creation, where you have these chaotic waters that are now being brought into organization, or whether it's most especially the crossing of the Red Sea, where God brings his people from chaos to safety, from near death to life. And you're going to read what's happening there with Jesus in light of these water stories in the Old Testament. And there's tons of other kind of details in that particular story, which inform us that what Jesus is doing when he's walking on the water is he isn't just kind of flexing his divine muscles and showing what a powerful guy he is, that he can walk on top of water. He is replicating the crossing of the Red Sea. He is Yahweh in the flesh, who is now trampling the waves, as Job chapter 9 describes what Yahweh does. And he is bringing his people who are in this storm safely to the other side, just like he brought the Israelites safely to the other side of the Red Sea. So you have these Old Testament images and themes in your mind when you're immersed in the Old Testament scriptures. And then these are going to illumine how you read the Gospels, because the entire New Testament builds upon the Old Testament. You take the Old Testament away, the New Testament collapses. It makes no sense. Not even the word Christ or Messiah makes any sense without its Old Testament background.
So I'm guessing you're not a dispensationalist.
No, I'm actually not. No, I'm a amillennial. That's my eschatology.
I don't interrupt you. I just wanted to make that clear. And if anyone No, I just needed a yes or no. And if anyone out there doesn't know what that means, we're not going to unpack that, but feel free to Google it.
Sure, there you go. Yeah, so I'll just wrap up. I'm just sitting here talking, but this stuff gets me very excited. So
no, listen, Chad, I think this is excellent.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I mean, here I think is a mistake that a lot of people make today within the church. So we talk about we're New Testament Christians. I'm not an Old Testament. I'm a New Testament Christian. Well, okay, I get that. However, just put yourself back in the first century. Imagine you are one of Jesus' earliest followers, say in the 10 or 20, 25 years after his resurrection. Okay, so you're in that first generation of Christians. What's your Bible? Well, your Bible is what we refer to as the Old Testament, period. Yeah, I mean, maybe there was, the beginning of one of the Gospels being written, some of Paul's letters, whatnot, but these were by no means collected into what we think of as the New Testament today. So if you're a follower of Jesus the Messiah in that earliest generation, and you want to talk about atonement, you don't open up Paul's letter to the Romans. I mean, maybe it even doesn't exist yet. You go to Leviticus. Or if you want to talk about the divine nature of Jesus, we don't turn to the opening chapter of John's Gospel or Colossians or something like that. You go to Daniel and you read about the Son of Man, or you read about the messenger of the Lord, usually translated the angel of the Lord. You want to talk about, you name it. I mean, you want to talk about baptism. You want to talk about the Lord's Supper. You want to talk about what the church is. You want to talk about all these various things. You go to the scriptures, which would be what we call the Old Testament. So for Jesus and the earliest believers, the Bible was very much shorter. It was 27 books shorter. It was just the Old Testament. And then the New Testament is basically the divinely inspired commentary on the Old Testament, saying that everything that these scriptures talked about with reference to Jesus has been fulfilled in him. And they're going to elaborate on that and explain further exactly how these scriptures point forward to him and are fulfilled in him.
So I'm going to read you a quote, and you're probably going to be familiar with it, but I just want to get through its entirety, because even if we are, it's good for the audience to hear this as well.
Yeah, sure.
You might know it as soon as I tell you the author or the person that said it, B.B. Warfield.
Oh, go ahead.
The Old Testament may be likened to a chamber richly furnished but dimly lighted. The introduction of light brings into it nothing which was not in before, but it brings out into clearer view much of what is in it, but was only dimly or even not at all perceived before. The mystery of the Trinity is not revealed in the Old Testament, but the mystery of the Trinity underlies the Old Testament revelation, and here and there almost comes into view. Thus, the Old Testament revelation of God is not corrected by the fuller revelation that follows it, but only perfected, extended, and enlarged. B.B. Warfield.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor to use. I've used similar things to that before, just to try and capture exactly what is being presented to us in the Old Testament. I mean, one of the things that I often referred to along these lines is, and I can't remember where Peter says this, but he talks about how the prophets themselves were studying their own writings to see what the Spirit of Christ within them was pointing toward. So the prophets themselves, who were divinely inspired, didn't fully understand exactly what was given them to say. So they were, as it were, studying their own prophetic writings so they could more clearly understand what was coming. So it was there. Everything was there. It's not as if all of a sudden with the incarnation, God became a Trinity. Or it's not all of a sudden, at the cross, God cares about sacrifice and atonement, or Jesus didn't become divine at some point. No, all these things were true, of course. God is always Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I would argue that when you have this fuller revelation in the New Testament and you go back to the Old Testament, what you're going to discover is the affirmation time and time and time again of these truths that we see more clearly in the New Testament. I mean, in my opinion, not everybody agrees with this, but in my opinion, you already have the Trinity in the opening 2 verses of Scripture. I like to kind of paraphrase them this way. In the beginning, who is the Word, who is the Son of God, God, the Father, created the heavens and the earth, and the Holy Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. So you don't get 2 verses into the Bible before all of a sudden you're looking at the 3 persons of the Holy Trinity. And of course, this is elaborated on in a variety of ways throughout the rest of the Old Testament. People don't realize how often there's talk about the Spirit in the Old Testament, because sometimes it's not translated as spirit, it's translated as wind or even the breath of God. In Hebrew, it's all the same. Ruach means spirit, wind, breath, and that's all over the place.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, a really clear and powerful passage is in Ezekiel 36 when the dead bones come alive and he breathes life into them. That in my mind is a direct connection to the opening chapters of Genesis.
Yes.
Breathing life into Adam.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And also, if you jump ahead to John 20, when Jesus breathes on his disciples and says, what does he say? Receive the Holy Spirit. So breath, spirit. And you see that in Ezekiel. You see that in other places in the Old Testament where maybe it's translated as wind or breath, but the wind of God, the breath of God is the Spirit of God. It's all the same word in Hebrew. It's just a different way of translating it depending on that context.
No.
And
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say, and the Son of God, I mean, he's presented, my goodness, he's the messenger. He's the Son of Man. Sometimes he's called the man, like when he appears to Manoah and his wife to announce the birth of Samson. He's called the glory. He's called the word. He's called wisdom. All of these various titles are applied to this person who is clearly distinguished from God, but at the same time called God. Clearly distinguished from Yahweh, but at the same time called Yahweh. So God sends him, and yet when he comes, he speaks as God. He acts with the authority of God, and people refer to him as God. So, you're reading these, you're like, what's going on here? Like, you go to Exodus 3, the burning bush. So the messenger appears, and the messenger, as described, is sent by God, and yet at the same time, he's called God. He's called Elohim. He's called Yahweh. So how could this happen? Well, obviously, for us who know that God is Trinity, all of this makes sense.
All right. So that was fantastic. It's awesome. One of the things that a lot of, if anyone there has ever tried to evangelize to their unchurched neighbors, one of the things that gets brought up, and I'm only bringing this up because we're talking about translation and different words mean different things. It's kind of basically a twofold question. The first one is, how can we still trust the Bible today if it's been translated so many times? And then the second one is does that mean that there are English versions now are like a watered down, trickled down version of the real thing, which is the Greek and the Hebrew?
Yeah. So can we trust them? Yes. Some of the greatest minds out there are those who work tirelessly to produce these translations. So it's not, when you have a translation, it's not produced by somebody who had a couple years of Greek and a year of Hebrew, and they kind of piece together this translation. No, these people probably know Greek and Hebrew as well as we know English. This is what they do. So they are deeply engaged in the text. And ideally, they also know English very well. And so they're able to look at these two languages and be like, okay, now I understand what the Greek says or understand what the Hebrew says, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability to bring out as much as I can with great accuracy and hopefully eloquence and rhetorical skill into English what this original says. So I guess that's really an answer to both of your questions. Can we trust these translations? Well, yeah. I mean, for the most part, there are some translations out there that I think are better than others. But
what would be if you're sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're fine. Yeah.
Question. If someone's out there listening and they're going, okay, because there's different philosophies on translation. Some are
sure.
ideas, some
yes.
are let's try to get this accurate. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like New American Standard is trying to get as accurate with the word as possible. A lot of English readers don't like it because it's so wooden, but some others are ideas. Like I think the Message Bible is kind of the idea or the concept.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and those are kind of two good ends of the spectrum examples to use. So years ago when I was at college and I took Greek and Hebrew, I bought a New American Standard. And that's what I've used as kind of my go-to Bible all these years. Is it the most rhetorically satisfying? No, it's not. I mean, there are numerous sections where it seems pretty wooden, but that was their goal. Their goal was to kind of give a what you might call a Greek and Hebrew, a Greekified English, a Hebrafied English, if you will. To stick as really closely as they can to what the text says. That was their philosophy. Now you get to the Message. I think the Message isn't a translation at all. The Message is more of a paraphrase than a translation. But the NIV, we might say, the NIV does not have the same philosophical approach to translation that the New American Standard has. NIV is much more prone to paraphrase at times, just to kind of to capture with more common English what's being communicated in the Greek and the Hebrew. So, and along this spectrum, you have, of course, also sorts of other translations. For kind of a middle of the road, I think the ESV, the English Standard Version, it's faithful, it's dependable, it's accurate, but it's also very easy to read. It doesn't sound like it's English in a foreign language. It sounds just like any other English text that we'd be reading.
So Chad, you would suggest the ESV for somebody, and then if maybe they wanted more of like a devotional style reading, the Message would be a good one for that, with that concept, with that idea.
Yeah. I in fact, sometimes I'll check the Message just to kind of see how he paraphrases, because especially in the Psalms. I think the Psalms are rich in the Message, just because sometimes he'll say things in such a way that I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a cool way to think about it in a different with a different image or different combination of words, as long as people realize it's a paraphrase. Okay.
Yeah, I think
it's not a translation. This is a paraphrase. So if they understand the Message in that way, it can be profitable. Just like, you're a preacher. Very often, I'm sure if you're teaching or preaching, you don't quote word for word a biblical text. You might paraphrase it. Or maybe sometimes you'll even put together two different passages. And, especially if you're just kind of off the cuff, And it's not like you're trying to some way change the scriptures. You're just paraphrasing like we all do in a variety of contexts in life.
Whenever I do that, I always preface it with, "This is the Pastor Anthony version."
There you go. That's perfect. Yeah. I like that.
It's so funny you mentioned the Psalms in the Message, because it's going to come out in the next few weeks. One of the things that me and Pastor Anthony do together on our YouTube page is we do these music review videos where we watch, we've been going through the band U2, and we just did a reaction video not that long ago. It's Eugene Peterson sitting down with Bono talking about.
Oh, yeah, I remember the interview. Yeah.
And it's just so funny you mentioned specifically the Psalms, because that's something that we have kind of like geeked out over, as far as like his summarization of the Psalms. It's just magnificent. And it's that was awesome.
Yeah, Peterson catches flack sometimes for the Message, but I don't really understand why. I mean, if you understand it's a paraphrase, not a translation, well, if you're paraphrasing something, my goodness, you've got a lot of leeway.
Right.
And I would point out for people who might think, yeah, but who are we to paraphrase the scriptures? Actually, this is a long, long history. If you go back to the time of Jesus or thereabouts, you already had paraphrases out. They were called a targum. So a targum was a Jewish practice. They would take the Hebrew scriptures and they would bring them into Aramaic. But when they brought them into Aramaic, they weren't just translating from Hebrew into Aramaic. They would paraphrase. They would often add extraneous materials. So you give an example. Genesis 4, Cain and Abel. All we read in English is that Cain spoke to Abel. And then the next thing we read, they're in the field, and of course, Cain kills Abel. But what did he say? Well, the Targums have this like long debate between Cain and Abel, where they're arguing about basically theodicy, like, where is God a reference to evil? Well, of course, none of that's in biblical text, but they add that in the Targum. And there's lots of examples like that. So that was a paraphrase. And there's a number of examples from Jewish literature that either predates or shortly thereafter postdates the life of Jesus, where it was called, the genre is called rewritten Bible. Jubilees is an example of that, where they would take the biblical text and they would just kind of retell the story. Josephus does the same thing when he describes the history of the Jewish people. So what Peterson did is by no means a novel practice. This goes way back to the time of Jesus.
Yeah, I think the key is just when people get so hung up on that, they're not understanding the intentions behind it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right.
So I want to take kind of a bit of a shift here. So You have a new book out now. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, if anybody's watching the video, by the way, let's see if I can get this up there. There you go. Isn't that a cool cover?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my colleagues at 1517, Brenton, he designs all our covers, and he just did. Every time I think that he's done his best work, he'll produce something like this. I'm like, wow, my goodness, it's amazing. So, the Christ Key subtitle is "Unlocking the Centrality of Christ in the Old Testament," and I guess the subtitle says it all. What I do is chapter by chapter, work my way through various Old Testament themes or categories, and I describe how these are either directly or indirectly pointing to the person and work of the Messiah. So I've got a chapter, for instance, where I'll talk about what I refer to as pencil sketches of the Messiah that he's going to fill in with full color. Look at the life of Adam or Noah or David or Gideon or Moses or any of these other Old Testament figures who, by their actions or their office, in some way prefigured what Christ was to do. I look at him in connection with creation and how his recreative work is his messianic work. Or a big category is the Exodus. So how is the Exodus as a historical event a prefigurement of what Christ is to accomplish in his own ministry? So this is basically, I guess you could call it 30 years of work just compressed down into this one volume, because this is what I've been doing since my early 20s, is talking about Christ in the Old Testament in a variety of different ways. I taught a 1517 Academy class called Christ in the Old Testament a couple of years ago. It's on the 1517.org website. You can find that there. And after I taught the class, I thought, you know what I should do is I should write the textbook. So I decided I'd go ahead and write this particular book based loosely upon those sessions in the Christ in the Old Testament Academy class. So anyway, people can find that and at Amazon or the 1517.org store and get themselves a copy. It'd be great.
Cool. Now this is your, correct me if I'm wrong, is this your fifth book you've written?
Yeah, it kind of depends. I self-published a couple books before I was picked up by Erdman's and later by Baker.
Okay.
So I do have a couple of books that I just put out on my own on poetry, hymnody, as well as a collection of sermons and meditations. But if they go to Amazon, for instance, and search me, probably the first one's going to come up is Night Driving, which I wrote about 4 years ago, I guess, something like that, which is my spiritual autobiography. Kind of tells a little bit of my background. It kind of answers the question, how did this guy who was part of the academy end up as a truck driver for 10 years? What happened? So I tell that story. It's a story of how God's healing mercy and grace brought me, the prodigal, back home. So that's called Night Driving. And then I wrote, that was for Erdman's. I wrote a couple for Baker, one called Your God is Too Glorious, and the other called Upside Down Spirituality, the 9 Essential Failures of a Faithful Life. So I wrote those two for Baker. And the next was a book that came out last year. It's called Unveiling Mercy, 365 Daily Devotions Based on Insights from Old Testament Hebrew. There, in that devotional, I take a Hebrew word every day, unpack it, connect it to Christ and his work. Those are really short, but I thought it was a cool idea for a devotional because there's just not, for people who don't know Hebrew, that's who it's written for. So this is I give them a taste, I guess, of what the languages are able to communicate in Unveiling Mercy.
I like that. I like to give the illustration when I'm preaching that part of the preacher's job is to take these stones that look common and then flip them over. And there you find a rich and deep meaning. And you do that a lot through, understanding the languages. So I remember when I took Greek first, then I took Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to my last name, it's Greek. Cloditis sounds like anyone that has a last name that sounds like you've just gotten a disease. They're usually Greek.
That's hilarious.
Every time I'd go back, I went to school. My undergrad was in Toccoa Falls College in Georgia. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's affiliated with the Christian and Missionary Alliance. But every time I'd go back after summer break or fall or spring break, my buddies, would, I'd give each other a high five or a hug, and they'd go, "Oh, my claditis is back." The reason I tell you that story is because in seminary, you would think that the Greek kid would do well in Greek. And in reality, I struggled more in Greek than in Hebrew. And I remember it wasn't a point that was specifically being made, but I remember my professor saying that Hebrew was archaic, and it was before it was written, it was like spoken, like a spoken word. And like he would give an example of how anger would be like the nose of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
hot nose, yes.
yeah, because it's common. That makes sense. Like a little kid, how do you know you're mad? Well, your face is all red.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I walked away, and I said, no wonder I resonate with Hebrew more. It's archaic, like myself. It's simpler than Greek. So I told that to my family, and they're all disappointed when they knew that I did better in Hebrew than in Greek. They wanted to like un-Greek me.
Did you have any background in speaking Greek at all? Modern Greek, I mean.
I'm Greek. My dad is from Greece. My mom's Italian, my dad's Greek. They both speak the language, but the problem is I think you need two parents in the house to speak the language. So I would let my mom speak to her family and my dad speak to his family, but it wasn't something going on in the house.
Yeah.
Basically, I can just tell you all the bad words in both languages.
That's typically what you pick up.
So I got to know you and your story through night driving. Mm-hmm. And one of the things and then also later read the book, Your God is Too Glorious. And one of the things that you don't have a lot of time left, but one of the things I wanted to touch on, and I think it's so important to talk about, especially in 2021, is you talked a lot about just church culture in general, how we treat spiritual leaders. And one of the things that I'm curious to hear more from you on this is, do you think that the church in today's culture has a healthy or an unhealthy attitude and view towards their local pastor?
That's difficult to answer in a general sort of way, because at least in my experience, it seems like that varies substantially from congregation to congregation. In my own tradition, so I'm part of what's called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I've known situations where pastors have gone through some pretty tough times, such as a divorce, for instance, and they've remained at that congregation. They've done whatever it takes with counseling and with ecclesial oversight and taking some time off and all that kind of stuff. And the congregation has actually almost shepherded them through this extremely painful, life-changing ordeal. And they've remained to still shepherd these people. So I've seen those things happen. So, of course, a very, very positive, encouraging message that pastors receive from their congregations and congregations from their pastors. But within my own tradition, I've seen pastors just destroyed by congregations, just eaten up and spit out and left for dead. Just horrible situations of what to me it almost borders on abuse. The way and this often for really the pastor not doing anything morally wrong. Maybe there were some disagreements. Maybe they didn't like him. Whatever it was, it was just a terribly unhealthy situation. So within my own tradition, I've seen both of those. I think probably broadly speaking, more on the unhealthy side, I suppose, is what I observe. But it really does depend from place to place. I know that. I've got my own story of my rocky relationship. Let's put it that way with the church. But I've known a lot of others who have been kind of just embraced and healed by their congregation. So it really does kind of depend from place to place.
So I want to just piggyback off of something real quick here before we end.
Sure.
What is a word of advice you could give a congregation in general? What's the do this, don't do this? I know people listening to this, it almost seems like pastors, pastors are always saying, oh, my job's the toughest. You don't know what it's like being a pastor. And, you may have some truck driver out there or some school teacher out there going, well, my job is tough too. Like what insight can you offer that why is pastoral ministry different?
Yeah. Well, I would urge the congregation to keep in mind a couple different things. Number one, and these aren't by any means great insights, but they do need to be said. Your pastor is a sinner just like you are. And that means that pastors are going to struggle. And there's going to be times when they don't want to go to church. They don't want to do their job because, maybe they've had an extremely hard week or they're tired or they're just emotionally exhausted. So cut them some slack. Be gracious. Show your pastor the same mercy that you would wish him to show you. I mean, I think that cannot be stressed enough. That pastors need forgiveness, they need support, they need encouragement, they need mercy. Now, what does set apart the pastoral ministry from other jobs is that the shepherd is given this immense weight of responsibility to speak God's word, no matter what the ramifications might be. Sometimes it's very difficult to repeat what God says to people that don't want to hear it. And I'm not talking about just the law. Sometimes this is the gospel. People don't want to hear the gospel. So
Sure.
The pastor's job is always to say what God has given him to say. And sometimes that's not going to be a welcome message. But because he bears that weight, and because he also bears the weight of just making sure that he's doing everything necessary to care for the spiritual welfare of his people, that's a great burden to bear. And you couple that with the fact that he's going to be facing the same or even harder temptations from the evil one to lure him into false belief or immorality or whatever it might be. There's a lot of pressure that is on the pastor, and so they need our prayers and our support and our mercy and forgiveness.
Chad, this has been super enlightening. I have really enjoyed our time together. Would you be willing to do a follow-up in the future?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I enjoy these conversations, and it feels like we kind of barely got started, and all of a sudden we're out of time. So
I agree.
Let's do a follow-up.
We can drill in a little further on some of the specifics in the future.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Well, listen, let me sign us out. If you're listening to this and you've been blessed, and if you found this insightful and meaningful, share it with your friends. Hit the subscribe button. That'll help the channel grow, and it'll get Chad's message, what he's doing for God out there, and we're excited for that. And this is Pastor Anthony and Seth signing off at Engage Podcast. We look forward to connecting with you next week.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.